Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that everything you worked for your entire life is completely gone. Your savings, your home, your future, all of it vanished overnight. Not because of a war, not because of a flood, but because of a market you trusted with your soul. This is not a movie script. This actually happened to millions of real people. And the scariest part is that those people were not stupid. They were just like you and me. Ordinary human beings who trusted the wrong dream at the wrong time. Millions of completely normal people, workers, teachers, shopkeepers, and dreamers, walked straight into the greatest financial trap in human history, with wide open eyes and hopeful smiles on their faces. If you want to know how the most golden era in history turned into the darkest financial nightmare the world had ever seen, stay right here. And before we begin, you hit that subscribe button right now, because this channel tells the stories that textbooks are too afraid to tell. The year is 1920, World War I has just ended and America's breathing again. Soldiers are coming home, factories are roaring back to life, and people are feeling something they have not felt in years. Genuine, beautiful, dangerous hope. The streets are alive with music, laughter, and ambition. A new decade is beginning and everyone can feel that something incredible is about to happen. Nobody knows yet that this same hope will one day be the very thing that destroys them completely. This era became known as the Roaring Twenties, and the economy was growing at an annual rate of around 4.2%. America felt unstoppable, like a train running at full speed with no brakes, and absolutely no reason whatsoever to slow down. And right in the middle of all this, excitement stood the stock market, glittering, magnetic, and seemingly magical, drawing in everyone who saw it, promising riches to any person brave enough to simply reach out and grab what was being offered. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was sitting at just 63 points in August 1921, and by September 1929 it had rocketed all the way up to 381 points. That is nearly a six-fold increase in less than 8 extraordinary years of non-stop growth. People watched their neighbors get rich overnight and they simply could not resist joining the party. The stock market had become the greatest show on earth and everyone desperately wanted a front-row seat to the spectacle. A famous economist at that time stood up and declared that stocks had reached a permanently high plateau and would never fall again. And people believed him without question. Banks believed him. Newspapers printed his words like gospel truth. When a man of authority tells you the rules have changed forever, you stop asking questions. And that silence, that blind, comfortable silence, became the deadliest weapon the market ever used against the people who trusted it. The real fire was poured on by something called buying on margin, a system that allowed ordinary people to buy stocks by putting down just 10% of the total price and borrowing the remaining 90% directly from their broker. It sounded brilliant, and it felt like free money. But it was actually a loaded gun pointed directly at the heads of millions of unsuspecting people, who had no idea just how dangerous the trigger they were pulling truly was. Word spread fast and the frenzy became impossible to contain. Cab drivers were talking stocks, housewives were buying shares, factory workers, teachers, barbers, and shop owners. Everyone wanted in on the action, no matter what it cost them. Factory workers in overalls, people who had never even heard the word portfolio before, were walking into brokers' offices and handing over their entire life savings for a piece of what seemed like the most obvious opportunity in human history. By August 1929, brokers had lent out more than $8.5 billion to margin buyers, alone a figure that actually exceeded all the money currently in circulation in the entire United States at that very same moment in time. This was not an economy built on real wealth. It was an economy built entirely on air, on dreams, and on borrowed time. A magnificent towering house of cards just waiting for one small breeze to bring it crashing completely down. Warnings did come, they always do, and in March of 1929 the Federal Reserve stepped forward and warned the public about excessive speculation happening across the market. But the confident investors barely blinked at the alarm being sounded. They saw the small dip that followed as nothing more than a buying opportunity, and rushed right back in with even more money. The warning was ignored, and the party continued louder and more recklessly than it had ever been before. September 1929 brought more signals that something was deeply and fundamentally wrong, and some seasoned bankers quietly started pulling their own money out of the market while publicly telling everyone else that everything was perfectly fine. The London Stock Exchange also suffered a significant blow around the same time, sending ripples of anxiety all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. But American investors held on to their optimism like a life raft in the middle of a growing storm. They were convinced that nothing could sink the greatest economy the world had ever built, that America was different, that America was special, that the old rules of finance simply did not apply to them or to their magnificent golden moment. Then came the day that history will never forget, October 24th, 1929. Known forever as Black Thursday, when investors began dumping their stocks in a massive wave of sheer blind panic that nobody had any power to stop. A record-shattering 12.9 million shares were traded in one single day. The ticker tape machines could not keep up with the speed of the selling and fell hours behind, leaving investors completely in the dark about what was happening to their money. The golden dream that millions of people had built their entire futures around had begun its collapse. And like all great collapses, once it started moving, there was no force on earth powerful enough to slow it down or reverse it. Bankers tried to calm the storm by buying up large blocks of stocks to show confidence in the market, and for a brief, terrifying moment it seemed to work. Prices steadied just enough to give people one last breath of false hope, but it was too late to hold back the flood. The fear had already entered the bloodstream of the entire market, and there was no medicine, no speech, no banker's promise that could stop what was coming in the days ahead. Monday, October 28, 1929 arrived and crushed what little hope remained. The Dow Jones Industrial Average plunged approximately 13% in a single trading day, one of the largest single-day drops ever recorded at any point in American financial history. Portfolios that had taken years of careful work to build were completely gutted in just a few hours. Margin calls flooded in from every direction, and investors who could not pay were forced to sell everything at whatever price they could find. Then came Black Tuesday, October 29, 1929, and it was unlike anything the world had ever seen before. A day so catastrophic and so total in its destruction that even those who lived through it struggled to describe what they witnessed. A staggering 16.41 million shares were traded on the New York Stock Exchange in a single day, completely shattering every record that had ever existed, and the scale of the selling was so massive that the machinery of finance simply broke down. Billions of dollars in wealth were permanently erased from the face of the earth in those few hours. Fortunes that have taken lifetimes to accumulate disappeared like morning fog burning away under a ruthless and unforgiving afternoon sun. Ticker machines ran so far behind that investors did not learn the full extent of their losses until hours after the market had already closed for the day, sitting in darkness waiting for numbers that would confirm their worst possible fears. The people who had bought on margins suffered the most brutal and merciless fate of all. Banks came knocking immediately, demanding full repayment of every single cent they had lent out without a moment of grace or sympathy for the borrower. Those who could not pay, and most could not, had their stocks liquidated on the spot at rock-bottom prices, their entire life savings disappearing in a matter of seconds while a cold and indifferent market moved on without even noticing them. But here is the cruelest part of the whole story. The debt to the bank did not disappear along with the stocks. People were left with absolutely nothing in their pockets and a crushing mountain of debt pressing down on their backs. The destruction spread far beyond Wall Street and deep into the veins of everyday American life. People stopped spending money out of sheer terror. Families who had been comfortable just months earlier were now standing in breadlines with nowhere else to turn. Major companies slashed production and laid off thousands of workers almost overnight. Unemployment began rising at a terrifying speed, and the recession that had quietly begun in the summer of 1929 exploded into something far larger and far more monstrous than anyone had imagined. People were selling their furniture on the street corner just to buy groceries. Children were going to school in torn shoes, and the American dream that had seemed so close and so real just 1 year earlier now felt like a cruel and elaborate joke. The banking system itself then collapsed under the crushing weight of this disaster. Banks had not just lent money to investors. Many of them had directly poured their own depositors' hard-earned savings straight into the stock market, without ever telling those depositors the truth. When the market fell, those banks had nothing left to give back to the people who trusted them. Thousands of banks shut their doors permanently, almost overnight, and the savings of millions of ordinary families were simply gone, without any warning or any apology. Thousands of banks across America fell like dominoes, each one pulling down the next, spreading panic and ruin from coast to coast and leaving communities completely stripped of the financial infrastructure they had depended on for their entire lives. People lined up outside locked bank buildings with their life savings trapped inside, pressing their faces against the cold glass, knowing their money was in there but having absolutely no legal way to ever get it back again. By July 8, 1932, the Dow Jones Industrial Average had crashed all the way down to just 41.22 points, a devastating fall of nearly 89% from its glorious 1929 peak, leaving almost nothing behind but rubble and broken promises. The record high of 381 points that the market had reached on September 3, 1929 would not be seen again until 1954, a full 25 years later, meaning that an entire generation of investors spent their whole adult lives just trying to break even. Men and women who had invested their futures into the market in their 30s grew old waiting to simply recover what they had lost. Many of them never did, and many of them went to their graves having never seen their money return. The crash did not stay inside America's borders, it swallowed the whole world. The Great Depression that followed lasted from 1929 all the way until 1939. A full decade of suffering, poverty, despair, and broken human lives on every continent. Global trade collapsed, unemployment soared in nearly every industrialized nation, and governments around the world scrambled and helplessly to respond to a crisis so large and so fast-moving that no existing policy or plan had any real answer for it. What began as a stock market fever on a single street in New York City ended up bringing entire civilizations to their knees, reshaping politics, governments, and the daily lives of hundreds of millions of people in every corner of the globe. So why did it all really happen? The answer is not complicated, it is heartbreakingly human. Greed, overconfidence, borrowed money, and the terrifying belief that this time is different combined perfectly to build the most elegant and deadly trap in financial history. The warning signs were there, the data was there, the logic was there, but when everyone around you is getting rich and the headlines are screaming success, it takes an almost superhuman level of discipline to simply walk away from the crowd. Most people simply cannot do it. The pull of easy money, the fear of missing out, the social pressure of watching your neighbor get rich while you sit on the sidelines. These forces are more powerful than almost any rational argument ever made. And here's the most chilling truth of all. None of this has gone away. Every few decades, the exact same story repeats itself with a different name and a different asset. Wearing a new costume, but telling the exact same tragic story underneath. The crash of 1929 has cousins in the dot-com bubble of 2000, the housing crash of 2008, and the wild swings of more recent markets. The faces change, the technology changes, but human nature stays exactly the same, generation after generation. If you placed a 1929 investor next to a modern investor during a bubble, you would see the same excitement in their eyes, the same dismissal of warnings, the same absolute certainty that this time the rules are truly and permanently different. The Golden Twenties did not destroy investors because the economy failed without warning. It destroyed them because they stopped thinking and started following. They traded wisdom for excitement, patience for speed, and careful caution for reckless blinding greed. The market did not trick them, they tricked themselves. And every investor alive today carries that same vulnerability somewhere deep inside them, quietly waiting for the right moment of euphoria to wake it up and take control completely. Now we want to hear from you. Do you think today's investors are repeating the exact same mistakes that wiped out an entire generation back in 1929? Or do you believe we have truly learned something real from history's most painful financial lesson? Drop your honest opinion in the comments below because this conversation truly matters. And if this story opened your eyes even a little, please subscribe right now, because the next story coming to this channel is even more powerful and you absolutely cannot afford to miss it.